A single American fighter faced an entire Japanese armada of 64 warplanes. What happened next rewrote the rules of aerial combat forever. Morning broke over northeast India on December 13, 1943. Second Lieutenant Philip Adair climbed his Curtiss P-40N Warhawk through scattered clouds above the Assam Valley. The clock read 9:27. 3 miles east, through the morning mist, an enormous formation materialized. 64 Imperial Japanese aircraft bearing down on Denjan Airfield. Adair was 23 years old. He'd logged 43 combat sorties protecting Allied supply routes over the Himalayas with the 89th Fighter Squadron. But on this particular morning, fate placed him alone in the sky as that massive enemy strike force approached his home base. The previous 2 months had seen relentless Japanese attacks on Allied installations throughout the region. 47 transport planes destroyed on runways, 112 personnel killed in coordinated strikes. The pattern was clear and devastating. Adair's mount, a P-40 nicknamed Lulu Bell bearing the number 44, carried 6 50-caliber Browning heavy machine guns. Total firing time at maximum rate? Roughly 12 seconds before the ammunition bins ran dry. What he faced was fundamentally impossible. 24 Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bombers formed the core of the incoming raid. Wrapped around them flew approximately 40 Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters, stacked in protective layers above and below the bomber's stream. Intelligence assessments from similar attacks in Burma showed 90% accuracy rates when these formations struck undefended targets. Below Adair's position sat everything vital to Allied operations in the theater. 14 C-47 transport aircraft loaded with critical cargo destined for Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese forces. A field hospital sheltering 63 wounded soldiers. Fuel reserves sufficient to sustain Himalayan airlift operations for 11 full days. If those bombers reached their target unopposed, the consequences would cripple supply lines for weeks. Sometimes, impossible odds are just an invitation to rewrite history. The nearest friendly fighters sat on the ground at Jorhat, 38 minutes away. Too far. Too late. Adair glanced at his fuel gauge. Internal tanks showed full capacity. 180 gallons, approximately 90 minutes of combat flight time. The Japanese formation flew 3,000 feet below him, maintaining 240 miles per hour toward the airfield. Standard doctrine was crystal clear. When outnumbered beyond 5-to-1 ratios, withdraw and wait for reinforcement. Adair calculated his odds: 64 enemy aircraft versus 1 American fighter. He could radio for support and track the formation from safe distance. By the time help arrived, Denjan would be rubble. Or he could attack immediately and attempt to break their bombing run. Alone. The throttle lever moved forward under his hand. His Allison V-1710 engine responded instantly, manifold pressure climbing to 54 inches. The Warhawk accelerated rapidly, 320 miles per hour and building. Positioning himself 4,000 feet above the bomber's stream, Adair approached from the southern quadrant with blinding sunlight at his back. The Oscar escort fighters hadn't detected him yet. Their attention remained fixed forward on the target zone. He possessed one critical advantage that wouldn't last: complete surprise. The Japanese expected interceptors near the target area, not 20 miles out. Adair formulated his attack plan in seconds. Strike the lead bomber element first. Disregard the fighters initially. Shatter their bombing precision. Force them to scatter. Make them abort. Could one obsolete American fighter disrupt 64 Japanese warplanes? Hit that like button to discover how this incredible story unfolds. Subscribe to WW2 Shadows for more untold stories. And let's continue with Adair's impossible decision. The lead Sally bomber group maintained tight formation discipline. 6 aircraft arranged in dual V patterns of 3. Adair inverted his fighter, pulled the control stick, and dove at the bombers from their 7 o'clock high position. His airspeed built with terrifying speed. 360 miles per hour. 380. 400. The P-40's Allison power plant screamed at maximum output. Range collapsed rapidly. The bomber crews remained completely unaware. At 800 yards separation, Adair squeezed the trigger. 6 50-caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. Tracers arced through freezing air toward the formation leader. Rounds walked methodically up the Sally's port wing surface. Fabric shredded. Metal sparked and buckled. The bomber's left engine erupted in brilliant orange flame. Black smoke poured from the destroyed cowling. The formation shattered instantly. Bombers broke left and right, their precise V formation dissolving into chaos. Adair hauled back hard on the stick. 7 gravities crushed him into his seat as he pulled out and rolled right. 40 Oscar fighters dove toward him like angry hornets. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar represented one of the Pacific Theater's most lethal dogfighters. Its Nakajima HA-115 engine produced 1,150 horsepower, delivering 329 miles per hour at 13,000 feet, and executing turning circles no American fighter could match. The Oscar's revolutionary butterfly combat flaps allowed extreme speed bleeding in turns without stalling. Japanese pilots exploited this ruthlessly. Previous 6 months, Oscars had destroyed 63 Allied fighters over Burma and northeast India. Adair's P-40N was faster in level flight, but couldn't compete in sustained turning engagements. The Warhawk's Allison V-1710-81 engine generated 1,240 horsepower at 3,000 RPM, yielding 378 miles per hour maximum below 12,000 feet. In protracted turn fights, however, the heavier American machine bled energy faster than the lightweight Japanese design. Standard P-40 tactics against Oscars were brutally simple. Never turn with them. Utilize speed, attack and extend, disengage, reset. But Adair couldn't extend away. Fleeing meant the bombers would reform and complete their attack on Denjon. He needed to maintain constant pressure, keep them scattered, keep them nervous, even if it meant engaging 40 Oscars single-handedly. The first 4 Oscars closed from his 10 o'clock high position in loose finger 4 formation. Adair rolled left, pulled nose up, fired a 2-second burst at the lead fighter. 50 caliber rounds missed high. The Oscar broke right. His wingman followed. Adair reversed hard, diving away to preserve airspeed. 2 additional Oscars dove from above. He spotted them at 400 yards, pulled into a climbing left turn, fired again. No hits registered. His ammunition counter displayed 800 rounds remaining across all 6 guns. Approximately 6 more attacks at current consumption rate. Behind the fighter screen, the Sally bombers attempted to reorganize. 3 groups of 6 aircraft each were closing back into formation discipline. If they achieved their bombing pattern again, they would press the attack forward. Adair had perhaps 90 seconds before they reached weapons release point over Denjon. He rolled out, slammed the throttle to the firewall, and dove toward the bombers again. 8 Oscars pursued him down. The P-40 accelerated to 405 miles per hour in the dive. The Oscars couldn't match that velocity. Adair opened separation, pulled level at bomber altitude, lined up on the right-hand Sally formation. Range, 300 yards. He fired. Tracers converged on the lead bomber's starboard engine. The Mitsubishi HA-101 radial engine detonated in a massive fireball. The bomber rolled right, streaming flames and debris. Its wingman broke formation violently to avoid collision. Adair kicked rudder, skidded left, fired at another sally. His rounds punched through the bomber's tissue-thin fuselage skin. The Ki-21 carried no armor protection for crew, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Designed in 1936, it was obsolete by 1943 standards, but it could still deliver 2,250 pounds of bombs, sufficient to obliterate everything at Denjin Airfield. The Oscar fighters closed again, 12 this time. Adair's fuel gauge read 162 gallons remaining. Ammunition counter showed 650 rounds. The bombers were 19 miles from Denjin. He had perhaps 4 minutes before they reached drop range. Then his engine temperature began climbing dangerously. The Allison V-1710-81 utilized liquid cooling. Coolant circulated through cylinder head passages and engine block, absorbing combustion heat, then flowing through a ventral fuselage-mounted radiator. At combat power settings exceeding 50 inches manifold pressure, the engine generated extreme thermal loads. The cooling system was engineered to handle sustained operation at those settings for approximately 20 minutes maximum. Adair had been running full power for 11 minutes straight. His coolant temperature gauge climbed to 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal operating temperature was 210. At 250 degrees, engine failure would begin. 3 options presented themselves. Reduce power to allow engine cooling, abandon the attack and return to base, or continue fighting and risk catastrophic engine failure over hostile jungle territory. The Sally bombers were 17 miles from Denjin, still within bombing range, still a mortal threat. Adair kept the throttle forward. 2 Oscars attacked head-on. Combined closing speed exceeded 600 miles per hour. Both fighters opened fire at 500 yards. Adair saw their muzzle flashes strobing. 7.7mm tracers walked toward his nose. He fired back. His heavier .50 caliber rounds carried superior energy and range. At 350 yards, his round struck the left Oscar's engine cowling. The lightweight fighter shuddered, broke left, trailing white coolant vapor. Its wingman followed. Adair rolled right and dove. His coolant temperature hit 240 degrees. The Sally bombers were 15 miles from target. 2 formations of 6 aircraft each had reformed into bombing V patterns. The third formation remained scattered. 3 bombers struggling to rejoin. Adair targeted the lead formation again. 6 Oscars attempted interception. He dove past them at 390 miles per hour, too fast for pursuit. At bomber altitude, he leveled and opened fire on the lead Sally. His initial burst struck the bomber's right wing root. The wing structure failed catastrophically. The outer panel folded upward and separated completely. The Sally rolled inverted and entered a terminal spin. No parachutes emerged. The crew rode it down into the jungle. The formation broke again. Bombers scattered in 3 directions. Their bombing accuracy was destroyed. Even if they released ordnance now, bombs would spread across miles of jungle instead of concentrating on the airfield. Adair pulled up hard. His coolant temperature gauge showed 248 degrees. The engine was running rough. He could feel vibration telegraphing through the control stick. Detonation was beginning in the cylinders, pre-ignition from excessive heat. Without power reduction soon, the engine would seize completely. 8 Oscars dove on him from above. He saw them late. Rolled left. Too slow. 7.7mm rounds punched through his right wing. Fabric tore. Metal buckled. 1 round struck his right aileron control rod. Aileron response went mushy. He needed increased right stick pressure to maintain level flight. Another burst walked up his fuselage. Rounds sparked off his engine cowling. One penetrated the coolant reservoir behind the firewall. Green coolant sprayed across his windscreen. The engine temperature gauge climbed past 260 degrees. Steam erupted from cowling seams. Oil pressure dropped. The Allison was dying. Adair chopped the throttle. Engine RPM fell from 3,000 to 2,400. Insufficient power to maintain altitude. The P-40 started descending, 1,000 feet per minute, then 1,500. The Oscars circled above, waiting. Then his engine caught fire. Fire in liquid-cooled aircraft engines follows predictable sequence. First, burning coolant vaporizes and ignites. Flames spread forward along the cowling, drawn by airflow. If fire reaches fuel lines running along the engine's left side, the aircraft explodes. Adair had perhaps 30 seconds before that happened. Standard procedure for engine fires: immediate shutdown and bailout. But his altitude was only 8,000 feet, descending rapidly, and he was 12 miles from friendly territory over jungle, where Japanese patrols operated. He kept the engine running. The Allison's fuel mixture could be leaned manually. Adair pulled the mixture control back to idle cutoff for 3 seconds, starving the engine. Fire intensity decreased. He pushed the mixture forward again. The engine coughed, caught, continued running, but rough. Power output had dropped to approximately 60%. Not enough to climb. Barely enough to maintain level flight. He was committed now, flying home on a burning, damaged engine or abandoning the aircraft over hostile territory. The Sally bombers were 13 miles from Denyan, still close enough to turn back and attack, but their formations had disintegrated completely. Individual bombers were heading southeast toward Burma. The raid was broken. The airfield was safe. Adair turned southwest toward his base at Nguli, 43 miles away, approximately 15 minutes flight time if the engine kept running. 6 Oscars followed him. At 7,000 feet, his engine oil pressure dropped to 0. The Allison ran on oil pressure to lubricate connecting rods, crankshaft, and camshaft. Without oil pressure, metal ground against metal. Friction generated heat. Heat caused expansion. Components seized. Adair felt engine vibration increase dramatically. The propeller began windmilling unevenly. Power output fell further. His airspeed dropped to 180 miles per hour. The P-40's stall speed was 120. He was losing the margin between controlled flight and falling. Behind him, the Oscars closed to 400 yards. They didn't fire. They were watching, waiting for complete engine failure, waiting for him to bail out or crash. One Oscar pulled alongside, close enough for Adair to see the pilot's face clearly. The Japanese pilot gestured downward. Land the aircraft. Surrender. Become a prisoner. Adair ignored him. At 6,000 feet, smoke began filling his cockpit, not from the engine fire, from electrical wiring behind the instrument panel. The rounds that had hit his fuselage had severed control cables and damaged the electrical system. Smoke burned his eyes and throat. He slid the canopy open. Wind blast cleared some smoke, but slipstream made breathing difficult. His airspeed fell to 160 miles per hour. The Oscars backed off. They weren't going to waste ammunition. The American pilot was already dead. His aircraft was crippled. The engine was dying. He would crash in the jungle. They circled higher, watching him descend. At 4,000 feet, Adair's right aileron control cable snapped. The aileron flopped to full deflection. The P-40 rolled right violently. Nose dropped into a dive. He hauled back on the control stick with both hands. Nothing. The elevator cables were damaged. He had no pitch control. The nose stayed down. His airspeed increased rapidly. 200 miles per hour, 220, 250. The jungle rushed upward at him. Altitude 3,000 feet. 2,500. 2,000. He was going to crash. Then he had an idea. The P-40's damaged aileron was forcing the right wing down. The broken elevator cables left the horizontal stabilizer in nose-down position. Gravity and aerodynamic forces were pulling the aircraft into uncontrolled dive. But aerodynamics work bidirectionally. If Adair rolled the aircraft inverted, the damaged aileron would force the right wing upward instead of down. The elevator stuck in nose-down trim would push the tail down, lifting the nose up. Flying upside down would reverse the control inputs. The damage killing him right side up might save him inverted. At 1,800 feet above the jungle, Adair rolled the P-40 completely inverted. -1 gravity pressed him against his shoulder straps. Blood rushed to his head. Vision turned red around the edges. The fuel system designed for positive G-loads struggled to feed fuel to the engine inverted. The Allison coughed, sputtered, nearly quit, then caught again, running rough but producing power. The nose came up. The descent slowed. At 1,200 feet, the P-40 leveled out, flying upside down at 140 miles per hour. Adair held the inverted attitude for 40 seconds. His airspeed increased to 160. He was climbing slowly, 50 feet per minute, but climbing. Then the fuel starvation problem returned. The engine began cutting out. He rolled right side up. The damaged controls immediately pushed the nose down. The P-40 descended again, 600 feet per minute. Adair waited until he lost 300 feet, then rolled inverted again. The nose came up. He climbed 200 feet before fuel starvation forced him to roll upright. The pattern repeated. Upside down to climb. Right side up to let fuel feed properly. Flip, climb, flip, descend. Flip, climb. Desperation doesn't ask permission. It invents solutions mid-flight. The 6 Oscars circling above watched this impossible display. An American P-40 with burning engine and damaged controls, flying alternately inverted and upright, refusing to crash, clawing for altitude with the determination of a wounded animal refusing to die. One Oscar dove to investigate. Adair saw him coming, rolled inverted to gain altitude, then rolled upright directly at the Japanese fighter. The Oscar broke away. The American pilot was either insane or desperate. Either way, the Oscars decided not to engage. They turned east toward Burma. Adair continued his rolling climb toward Nguli. His fuel gauge showed 83 gallons. Oil pressure gauge showed 0. The needle had been pegged at 0 for 9 minutes. The engine should have seized by now. Connecting rods should have welded to the crankshaft. The fact it still ran defied mechanical logic. The Allison was running on momentum, friction, and whatever microscopic oil film remained on internal components. His altitude reached 3,000 feet, then 4,000. The base at Nguli was 21 miles southwest, approximately 11 minutes away if he maintained current speed. His coolant temperature gauge no longer registered. The needle had melted off at some point. Smoke still poured from the cowling, but flames had died down. Either the fire had consumed all available fuel, or lack of coolant had somehow starved it. At 5,000 feet, Adair spotted Nguli Airfield ahead. The runway, the tower, the revetments, safety. But he faced a new problem. His landing gear was hydraulic. The hydraulic system ran on engine power. His engine was producing minimal power and might quit completely any second. If he lowered the gear and the engine died, he would crash short of the runway with gear down. If he kept the gear up and attempted belly landing, impact might rupture remaining fuel tanks, and the aircraft would burn. He needed the gear down and locked before engine failure. He reached for the gear lever. His right hand was shaking. Not from fear, from carbon monoxide poisoning. Cockpit smoke had been accumulating for 14 minutes. He pulled the gear lever down. Nothing happened. The P-40's hydraulic system operated at 1,000 pounds per square inch. Hydraulic fluid, pressurized by an engine-driven pump, flowed through steel lines to actuators that extended and retracted landing gear. With the engine producing minimal power, the hydraulic pump wasn't generating sufficient pressure. The gear remained locked in up position. The P-40 had a backup system, a manual hand pump mounted on the cockpit's left side. 28 strokes of the pump handle would manually pressurize the hydraulic system enough to lower the gear. Adair grabbed the pump handle with his left hand, keeping his right on the control stick. He pumped. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. The gear stayed up. The hand pump required both hands for effective operation, but releasing the stick meant losing aircraft control. His damaged ailerons and elevator would immediately push the nose down. He reached behind his seat, pulled his lap belt loose, wrapped it around the control stick, looped it through the seat frame, pulled tight. The makeshift rig held the stick in approximate neutral position. Not perfect control, but enough to keep the aircraft flying straight. He grabbed the hand pump with both hands and pumped hard. 5 strokes. 10. 15. At stroke 23, he felt resistance. Hydraulic pressure building. At stroke 28, he heard a thunk from beneath the cockpit. The left main gear extended and locked. The right main gear followed 3 seconds later. The P-40 was now draggy. Gear down increased drag significantly. His airspeed fell from 160 miles per hour to 135. Still above stall speed, but not by much. The engine was producing perhaps 40% power now, barely enough to maintain altitude with gear extended. Nagali runway was 7 miles ahead. 3 minutes. His vision tunneled. Gray edges closed from periphery. Carbon monoxide poisoning was affecting brain function. He shook his head, focused on the runway. 6 miles. His engine temperature gauge, the one still working, showed 310 degrees, far beyond redline. Metal components inside the engine were expanding from heat. Tolerances were closing. Any second now, a piston would seize, or a valve would stick, or a connecting rod would snap. 5 miles. The tower operators at Nagali saw him coming, a P-40 with smoke trailing from the cowling, flying erratically, gear down. They assumed he would make normal approach. Lower flaps, reduce speed, touch down on main wheels first. Standard landing procedure. But Adair's flaps were hydraulic too. With minimal engine power, he couldn't pump enough hydraulic pressure for both gear and flaps. The gear was down. The flaps stayed up. Landing without flaps meant higher landing speed, 120 miles per hour instead of 90. That meant longer landing roll. Naguli's runway was 4,000 feet long. A flapless landing in a damaged aircraft required at least 3,000 feet. Doable if he maintained airspeed. If the engine kept running. If he touched down smoothly. At 2 miles from the runway, his engine quit. The propeller windmilled to a stop. No power, no thrust. The P-40 became a glider, a very poor glider. The Warhawk's glide ratio was approximately 8-to-1. From 2,000 feet altitude, he could glide approximately 3 miles. The runway was 2 miles away. Theoretically possible. But his damaged aircraft had extra drag from battle damage. Bullet holes in wings and fuselage disrupted airflow. His actual glide ratio was worse than normal, perhaps 6-to-1. He wasn't going to make the runway. He was going to crash short in the jungle. After surviving 64 Japanese aircraft, after flying inverted for 11 minutes, after nursing a dying engine for 15 miles, he would crash 200 yards from safety because his engine quit at the worst possible moment. Then he remembered something from training, something his instructor had said about P-40 glide performance, something about flying inverted. In normal glide, an aircraft descends nose first, gravity pulling it downward while wings generate lift. But inverted, the aerodynamics reverse. The wing camber designed to generate lift upward when right side up generates downward force when inverted. However, at specific angles of attack, this reversal creates less drag than right side up flight. An inverted glide could theoretically extend range by reducing drag. The principle had been mentioned briefly during training. No instructor expected pilots to actually use it. Adair had nothing to lose. He rolled inverted at 1,800 feet, 1 mile from the runway. Blood rushed to his head. Vision reddened. He held the inverted attitude, watching jungle pass beneath him, or above him. Perspective became disorienting. Airspeed held steady at 125 miles per hour. Descent rate was 500 feet per minute, better than the 700 feet per minute he'd been experiencing right side up. The tower operators at Nguli saw an inverted P-40 approaching with landing gear extended. Gear down while inverted was aerodynamically wrong, structurally stressful. The gear doors designed to handle air loads from below were now subjected to loads from above. But the gear held. The P-40 continued its inverted approach. On the ground, a crew chief named Technical Sergeant Robert Martinez watched through binoculars. He saw the inverted aircraft, saw the gear extended, saw smoke trailing from the engine. His first thought, a Japanese pilot had stolen a P-40 and was attempting to strafe the field. Martinez ran toward the nearest .50 caliber machine gun position. 3 other ground crew followed. They reached the gun emplacement and began traversing the weapon toward the approaching aircraft. Adair was at 400 feet altitude, half a mile from runway threshold, still inverted. His vision was fading. Gray tunnels closed in. Carbon monoxide and negative G-forces were shutting down his brain. He had perhaps 20 seconds of consciousness remaining. He needed to roll upright, line up with the runway, and land. But if he rolled upright too soon, damaged controls would push the nose down and he'd crash short. If he rolled too late, he'd overshoot the runway. At 200 feet altitude, 300 yards from threshold, Adair rolled right side up. The damaged aileron immediately pushed the right wing down. He countered with left stick, fighting the aircraft, forcing wings level. The nose wanted to drop. He pulled back on the stick. The broken elevator cables gave him partial control. Not much. Just enough. The P-40 descended toward the runway at steep angle, nose high, wings wobbling. Martinez's gun crew tracked the aircraft. The P-40 was definitely damaged. Smoke poured from it. It might be friendly. It might be enemy. In 3 seconds, the aircraft would cross the runway threshold. Martinez had to decide, shoot or hold fire. He held fire. Adair crossed the threshold at 90 feet, descending rapidly. Too fast, too steep. The P-40 dropped the last 90 feet in 4 seconds. The main wheels hit concrete runway hard. 7G impact. The gear struts compressed fully. The tail wheels slammed down. Metal shrieked. The right main gear collapsed. The right wing dropped. The wingtip hit the runway and dug in. The aircraft ground-looped right, spinning 180 degrees, throwing up sparks and concrete fragments. It skidded backward for 200 feet and stopped. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment. Fire crews raced toward the aircraft. Adair sat motionless in the cockpit for 12 seconds. Then he released his shoulder straps, stood up, and climbed out onto the wing. His legs buckled. He caught himself on the wing root. Ground crew reached him and helped him down. Martinez arrived with the fire crew. They opened the cowling. The Allison engine was destroyed, pistons seized, crankshaft warped, Oil pan ruptured, coolant everywhere. Adair walked around the aircraft with Martinez. They counted the damage. 16 bullet holes in the fuselage, 7 in the right wing, 4 in the left. One round had severed the right aileron control cable completely. Another had punctured the hydraulic reservoir. A third had cut through 2 electrical bundles behind the instrument panel. The engine had sustained catastrophic damage from overheating and oil starvation. Every cylinder showed scoring. 3 connecting rods were welded to the crankshaft. The coolant system was destroyed. Lulu Bell would never fly again. But Philip Adair had saved Dengen Airfield. Intelligence reports confirmed all 24 Sally bombers had turned back without dropping ordnance. The Japanese formation had scattered 15 miles short of target. 40 Oscar fighters had escorted empty bombers back to Burma. 0 bombs hit Allied facilities. 0 casualties on ground. 14 C-47 transports remained operational. The hump airlift continued without interruption. On December 16, 1943, 3 days after the mission, 10th Air Force Headquarters interviewed Adair about the engagement. He described the attack sequence, the inverted flying technique, the landing approach. Flight surgeons examined him. Carbon monoxide levels in his blood were still elevated 72 hours after the mission. They determined he had been flying with severe poisoning for the final 11 minutes of flight. That level of impairment should have rendered him unconscious. He had somehow remained functional through will alone. On January 8, 1944, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell, commander of U.S. Forces China-Burma-India Theater, presented Second Lieutenant Philip Adair with the Silver Star. The citation read, "For gallantry in action against enemy forces on December 13, 1943, when Lieutenant Adair, flying alone, engaged and disrupted a formation of 64 enemy aircraft, attacking Allied installations, continuing his attack despite severe aircraft damage and personal injury, thereby preventing destruction of critical supply facilities." Adair flew 95 more combat missions with the 80th Fighter Group. He achieved ace status with 5 confirmed kills. On his final mission in July 1944, he shot down 2 Kai-43 Oscars over northern Burma. He returned to the United States in September 1944, survived the war, and remained in the Air Force for 30 years. He retired as a full colonel in 1971. The 80th Fighter Group, the Burma Banshees, continued operations until August 1945. The unit destroyed 413 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat and 147 on the ground. They lost 63 pilots killed or missing. Their death's head skull insignia became one of the most recognized markings in the China-Burma-India theater. The P-40 Warhawk never achieved the fame of the P-51 Mustang or P-47 Thunderbolt. It was slower than both. It couldn't fight effectively above 15,000 feet. By 1943, it was considered obsolete. But in the hands of determined pilots like Philip Adair, the rugged Curtiss fighter proved what mattered most in combat wasn't the aircraft's specifications. It was the courage and skill of the pilot flying it. One pilot, one obsolete fighter, 64 enemy aircraft. December 13, 1943. Philip Adair proved that impossible odds mean nothing when someone refuses to quit. His solution to damaged controls, flying alternately inverted and upright for 11 minutes, defied every standard flying procedure. His inverted landing approach with gear extended had never been attempted before, and was never repeated. That's the story of the Burma Banshees, and the Day 1 P-40 pilot disrupted an entire Japanese raid. If stories like this remind you why we preserve history, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to WW2 Shadows for more forgotten heroes, and turn on notifications so you never miss these stories. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and whether anyone in your family served in the CBI theater. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.